Have you ever made a promise? Of course you have. We all do. But have you ever stopped to wonder, when does that simple promise cross a line and become something a court can actually enforce? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today. We are building a legally binding contract from the ground up, using the official blueprint from English law.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to see why just saying "I promise" isn't going to cut it. Then we'll get into the real building blocks, the offer, the acceptance, and what's called the price of the promise. And finally, we'll look at the step that makes it all official. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what the law is looking for.
So, this really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? You promise a friend you'll help them move, and they promise to buy you pizza. Is that a contract? What about when you agree to sell your old laptop online for 100 quid? Where exactly does the law draw that line between a casual agreement and a legally binding one? Let's find out.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning, with the foundation. In the eyes of the law, a casual "I promise" just isn't solid enough to build a legal case on. For an agreement to be taken seriously by a court, it needs a much, much stronger structure. And there's a really good reason for this. I mean, can you imagine if every single casual promise, "Oh, I'll call you later," or "Yeah, I'll pay you back for that coffee," could end up in a lawsuit? It would be absolute chaos. And that's exactly why the law demands a specific set of ingredients to turn a simple promise into a formal, enforceable contract. So, let's lay our first brick, the offer. This is the starting pistol for any potential contract. It has to be a clear, definite proposal from one person to another, saying, "Hey, here are my terms."
But what actually counts as a legal offer? Let's take a classic scenario. You're walking down the high street, you see a jacket you love in a shop window, and it's got a price tag on it. Has that shop just made a legally binding offer to sell you that specific jacket for that specific price? Well, the answer might actually surprise you.
Okay, so here's the twist. That price tag, it's not an offer. In legal terms, it's called an invitation to treat. Basically, the shop is just inviting you to make an offer to buy the jacket. When you take that jacket to the cashier and say, "I'd like to buy this," that is the offer. When they take your money, that is the acceptance. This little rule applies to almost everything you see for sale: goods on shelves, advertisements, catalogs. It's a clever way to stop a shop from being legally forced to sell to every single person who sees their ad. Right, so we've got our offer on the table. The next building block is acceptance. Once a clear offer has been made, it needs a clear, unambiguous yes in response. This is the handshake moment where the deal is sealed.
But acceptance isn't just a simple yes. It has some really strict rules. First, it has to be a mirror image of the original offer. So if someone offers to sell you a car for £5,000, you can't say, "I accept, but only if you throw in new tires." That's not acceptance at all. That's a counteroffer, and it actually destroys the original offer. So your acceptance has to be total, unconditional, and, this is key, it has to be communicated back to the person who made the offer.
All right, so we have an offer and we have an acceptance. We're done, right? Nope. English law requires a third absolutely vital element, and honestly, this is the one that often trips people up. It's called consideration.
So, what on earth is consideration? Put simply, it's the something for something. It is the price that each person pays for the other person's promise. In a valid contract, there's just no such thing as a one-way street. Both sides have to bring something of value to the table. That could be money, goods, a service, or even a promise not to do something.
Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. The law says that consideration must be sufficient, which means it has to be real, tangible, and have some value. But, and this is a big but, it does not need to be adequate. The courts will not get involved in whether you made a good deal or terrible one. If you agree to sell your £200,000 house for just £1, as long as that pound is actually exchanged, the contract is valid.
And nothing illustrates this point better than this classic legal saying: even something as tiny and seemingly worthless as a single peppercorn can be good consideration. It doesn't matter if the person getting it hates pepper and is just going to throw it away. The only thing that matters is that a bargain was made. That's what the court looks for.
We are on the home stretch now, our final element. We've got our offer, our acceptance, and our consideration. The very last piece of the puzzle is this: both parties must have actually intended for their agreement to be a serious, legally binding one. So how do we figure that out? Well, the law uses two really powerful starting points, or presumptions, depending on the situation. In social or family settings, like that promise to buy your friend pizza, the law automatically presumes you don't intend to create a legal contract. But in a commercial or business deal, the presumption is the total opposite. The law assumes you absolutely do intend for your agreement to be legally binding.
So,
Let's pull it all together. There you have it, the complete 4-point checklist for a valid contract. Think of this as your essential blueprint. You need a clear offer, a mirror image acceptance, consideration from both sides, and a real intention from everyone to be legally bound by the deal.
And I have to stress this is not a pick and mix situation. All 4 of these elements are mandatory. They all have to be there. If even one is missing, the whole structure is unsound. You don't have an enforceable contract. You just have a broken promise. Which brings us to a final, pretty crucial thought. We've just gone through how to build a valid contract. But what happens when it all goes wrong? You know, when the offer is fuzzy, the acceptance is actually a counteroffer, or the consideration just isn't there. Well, that's when things get very messy, and it really shows just how important it is to get this blueprint right from the very start.